She never wanted this marriage. Forced by her family, the poor village girl believed her life had ended the moment she was tied to a man with nothing but empty pockets and worn-out shoes. Whispers followed her everywhere, mocking her for marrying someone even poorer than herself. Hunger, humiliation, and endless struggles became her reality. But what no one knew, not even she, was that the man everyone pitied was hiding a secret worth billions. And the day that truth came out, the same people who laughed at her would fall silent in shame. This is the story of a girl who thought she lost everything, only to find out she had married into a destiny beyond her wildest dreams. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth of the small, forgotten village where Anya lived. Dust hung in the air like a curse, settling on rooftops, clothes, and even dreams. The village had only two kinds of people: those who had given up and those who were too poor to even think of giving up. Anya belonged to the latter. Every morning, she woke to the same sounds: the bleating of goats, the clang of metal pots, and the sharp, impatient voice of her stepmother echoing through the mud-plastered walls. Anya had lost her mother when she was just a child. Her father, a frail farmer, beaten down by debts, had remarried soon after, not out of love, but necessity. And necessity had turned their home into a battlefield, where Anya always stood on the losing side. Her stepmother treated her less like a daughter and more like a servant, barking orders from dawn until dusk. Washing clothes in cold water that numbed her fingers, sweeping floors until her back ached, cooking meals she could barely taste. All while her stepsisters sat in the courtyard, painting their nails and giggling about boys who would never look Anya's way. She didn't complain. Complaining required energy, and energy was a luxury in a life where every breath felt borrowed. But then came the day when everything changed. Or at least that's what her stepmother promised. Anya, her stepmother said one evening, her tone unusually sweet, which only meant one thing: trouble. You're getting married. The words landed like stones in her stomach. Married? To whom? She was barely 20, with dreams buried so deep she no longer dared dig them out. She wanted to study, maybe move to the city, earn enough to buy herself a life that didn't smell of poverty. Marriage was not part of that plan, especially not marriage arranged by a woman who saw her as little more than free labor. Why? Anya asked softly, her voice trembling like the flame of the oil lamp flickering in the corner. Her stepmother's eyes hardened, the sweetness evaporating like morning dew. Because I said so, and because your father owes money we cannot repay. This is your chance to save this family. Anya's heart sank. She didn't need to ask further. This was not about love. It was about survival. Within a week, the wedding was arranged. There was no celebration, no music, no bright colors splashed across the courtyard. Just a small, hurried ceremony under the shade of a neem tree, attended by a handful of curious villagers who whispered behind their hands. Poor thing, one woman muttered, marrying a man even poorer than her. Her groom, Arjun, stood quietly through it all, his head slightly bowed. His clothes were simple, his shoes dusty. There was nothing about him that spoke of wealth or status. If anything, he looked like every other struggling farmer in the village, thin, weathered by the sun, hands calloused from work that never seemed to end. Anya barely looked at him as the sacred thread circled their heads and the fire crackled between them. Her mind was elsewhere, on the life she was leaving behind, on the dreams she was burying deeper than ever before. When the ceremony ended, she stepped into her new life with the weight of chains she couldn't see but could feel, tightening around her throat. The House of Shadows, Arjun's home, was a modest two-room mud structure at the edge of the village. The thatched roof sagged in places, and the walls bore scars from years of neglect. Anya's heart sank when she first saw it. She had imagined poverty, yes, but this was worse. Inside, It smelled of damp earth and something metallic like old coins. There were no luxuries here, not even basic comforts. A single cot stood against the wall, its ropes frayed. A brass pot sat in the corner, filled with stale water. The kitchen, if it could be called that, was just a blackened stove in the open courtyard, surrounded by soot-streaked walls. Her stepmother's words rang in her ears. "This is your life now. Make peace with it." And so, Anya did what she always did. She endured. Days turned into weeks, and life became a monotonous cycle of chores. Fetching water from the well at dawn, cooking meager meals of lentils and rice that barely filled their stomachs, washing clothes in the icy stream that cut through the village. Her hands grew rougher, her back more stooped. Arjun spoke little. He was polite, even kind in small ways, bringing her wildflowers from the fields, leaving extra wood by the stove when nights grew cold. But he was distant, almost secretive. He spent long hours away from home, returning late at night with dust on his clothes and exhaustion etched into his face. When Anya asked where he went, he smiled faintly and said, "Work." But what work? The fields lay dry, the crops failing with every season. There were no factories nearby, no wealthy landlords hiring labor. She didn't press further. Curiosity was another luxury she couldn't afford. The whispers begin. It wasn't long before the villagers began talking. "They always did. Did you hear?" a woman whispered at the well one morning, her voice dripping with mock pity. "Anya married a pauper. Look at her, fetching water like a servant." Another laughed, the sound sharp as glass. "At least, before she had a roof that didn't leak." The words stung like nettles, but Anya kept her head down. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than answers. But the whispers grew louder when her stepmother came to visit one day, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, glancing around the bare courtyard, "this is your palace?" Anya said nothing. There was nothing to say. Her stepmother's gaze swept over her like a blade, taking in the faded sari, the chapped lips, the hollowness in her eyes. "Well," she said finally, "you chose this. Life. No," Anya thought bitterly. "You chose it for me." That night, as she lay on the cot staring at the cracked ceiling, something inside her shifted. She had never expected luxury. She had never even hoped for happiness. But this endless cycle of hunger and humiliation was not what she had imagined when she thought of marriage. And yet, despite everything, a strange feeling began to take root in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name. Because sometimes, in the quiet moments when Arjun returned home and his eyes softened at the sight of her, she felt safe, not happy, not free, but safe. And safety, in a world that had given her nothing, felt like a fragile treasure, a hint. Of mystery one evening, as Anya swept the courtyard, she noticed something strange. Arjun's old wooden trunk, usually locked and tucked under the cot, was slightly ajar. Inside, beneath a pile of worn clothes, something gleamed. A leather wallet, thick with cash far more than any poor farmer could ever earn. Her breath caught. Where had this money come from? Before she could look closer, Arjun's voice startled her from behind. "Looking for something?" She spun around, her heart pounding. He stood there, his face unreadable, his tone calm. But his eyes held something she couldn't quite place. No, she stammered, stepping back. "I was just cleaning." He smiled faintly, closing the trunk with a soft click. "Some things," he said quietly, "are better left untouched." That night, as she lay awake, Anya's mind raced. Who was this man she had married? Why? Did he have so much money hidden away? And why, despite everything, did she feel that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't begin to imagine? The days that followed were heavy with the weight of questions Anya couldn't voice. Each morning she woke before dawn, slipping silently from the cot to fetch water from the well. Her bare feet pressed into the damp earth, and the chill of the early hour clung to her bones. She worked without complaint because complaining solved nothing, and hope had long since fled. But now, hope wasn't the only thing haunting her. It was curiosity. It gnawed at her like hunger, sharp and relentless. That trunk, that wallet, the money, more than any man in their village could save in a lifetime. Where had it come from? Arjun was gone for hours each day, sometimes not returning until well past sunset. His hands were never blistered like those of other farmers. His clothes, though simple, were always clean. And there was something in the way he carried himself. Not like a man beaten down by poverty, but like someone hiding behind a mask. Anya wanted answers, but she was afraid of what they might mean. The village turns cruel. The whispers began as faint ripples, but ripples in a small village turn into waves quickly. Anya could feel them crashing against her every time she stepped out of the house. "Look at her," one woman hissed near the well, her voice dripping with scorn. "Married off like a burden to a man who can barely feed himself." Another laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the morning air. At least her stepmother's house had 4 walls that didn't leak. Their laughter burned through her like acid. She kept her head down, clutching the rope of the water bucket until her knuckles whitened. She had lived with humiliation before, but this felt different. Because every insult wasn't just a reminder of her own poverty. It was a reminder that she had married a man who was supposed to be her protector, her strength, and yet she was still the village joke. That evening, when she returned home, her stepmother was waiting. Anya froze at the sight of her standing. In the courtyard, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, sweeping her gaze around the mud walls, the sagging roof, the blackened stove. "This is your palace?" Anya said nothing. Her silence only seemed to fuel her stepmother's cruelty. "You always thought you were better than my daughters, didn't you?" she sneered. "Look at you now, living like a beggar, married to a man who has nothing." The words struck, like whips, each one leaving an invisible scar. Anya wanted to scream, to tell her about the wallet, about the money, but something stopped her. A voice inside whispered, "Wait. Watch. There's more to this story than they know." Her stepmother left with a smirk, satisfied with the wounds she had carved. And Anya felt a fire begin to flicker in the ashes of her despair. Clues in. The dark that night, Arjun returned late, later than usual. His clothes were dusty, but there was no weariness in his movements, no slump in his shoulders. Instead, there was an energy about him, a quiet confidence that didn't fit the picture of a poor farmer. As Anya served him dinner, her eyes drifted to his hands. No blisters, no cracks. Just strong, well-kept fingers, not the hands of a man who toiled under the sun all day. When he caught her staring, he smiled faintly, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Is something wrong?" She shook her head quickly, forcing a smile. "No." But inside, questions churned like a storm. Later, as he slept, she rose quietly from the cot, her bare feet silent against the floor. The trunk sat where it always did, its wooden surface gleaming dully in the dim light. Her heart pounded as she knelt before it, her fingers trembling as they reached for the latch. It was locked. She exhaled slowly, relief and disappointment tangling inside her. Maybe it was for the best. Maybe she didn't want to know. And yet, when she lay back down beside him, sleep refused to come. Because the truth was no longer a distant shadow. It was here, in this room, between them, the festival of shame weeks. Passed. The monsoon came and went, leaving behind muddy fields and swollen streams. Life trudged on in its weary rhythm, until the day of the temple festival. For the villagers, the festival was a rare chance to shed their burdens, if only for a night. The air buzzed with excitement as stalls lined the dusty square, selling sweets, bangles, and bright fabrics that shimmered under the glow of lanterns. Music throbbed through the air, mingling with laughter and the clatter of drums. Anya hadn't planned to go. Festivals were for people who belonged, and she had never belonged. But Arjun insisted, his voice calm yet firm. "You've been locked away for too long," he said. "Come with me." She hesitated, but something in his eyes, something steady, reassuring, made her nod. When they arrived, the stares began immediately. Whispers followed like shadows. "Look at her sari, so plain. Didn't even bother to dress up. And him. At least he could have bought her some bangles." The words pricked, but Anya kept her chin up, clutching the edge of her sari as they moved through the crowd. She told herself she didn't care. But then came the moment that shattered what little composure she had left. Her stepmother appeared, flanked by her two daughters, their wrists jingling with glass bangles, their saris bright and new. They spotted Anya and swooped in like vultures. Well, her stepmother purred, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "If it isn't my dear stepdaughter, and her husband." She let the word drip with disdain. The crowd turned, hungry for drama. "Tell me," her stepmother continued, her smile sharp as a blade. "How does it feel, Anya, living in rags while we feast on sweets?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Heat flooded Anya's face, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. She waited for Arjun to speak, to defend her, to say something, anything. But he didn't. He stood there, calm, his expression unreadable. Her stepmother's eyes glittered with triumph. "Oh, don't be shy," she sneered. "Everyone knows. You married the poorest man in the village. Was this your grand dream? To spend your life fetching water and scrubbing floors?" The laughter grew louder, crueler. Anya wanted to disappear, to melt into the earth and never return. She turned to leave, her hands trembling, when she felt Arjun's hand close gently around hers. And in that moment, something in his eyes stopped her cold. Because it wasn't anger she saw there. It wasn't shame. It was something else. Something deep, steady, and unshakable. A promise. The day, everything changed. The festival ended, but the whispers didn't. If anything, they grew louder after that night. Every insult was a stone thrown at the fragile walls of Anya's pride, and each day those walls cracked a little more, and yet Arjun remained unchanged, calm, unruffled, almost as if he were waiting for something. Then came the day that set everything in motion. It was early morning when a black SUV rolled into the village, its sleek body gleaming like a serpent among worms. Villagers gathered, murmuring in awe. No one in the village owned a car, let alone a luxury one. The SUV stopped in front of Anya's house. She froze, the brass pot slipping from her hands and clattering to the ground. The door opened, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out, his posture exuding power. He glanced around, his eyes sharp, assessing. Then he spoke a name. "Arjun." The sound of it sliced through the murmurs like a blade. Heads turned, eyes widened, and then, slowly, Arjun stepped forward. The man in the suit stood like an immovable statue, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dusty earth. The villagers, drawn by curiosity like moths to flame, pressed closer, their whispers swelling into a low hum. "Arjun," the man said again, his voice smooth, commanding. "It's time." Time? For what? The question screamed in Anya's mind as her heart pounded like a drum. She turned to Arjun, expecting confusion, fear even. But there was none. His face was calm, his jaw set with quiet determination. Without A word. He walked toward the stranger, his steps steady despite the dozens of eyes boring into him. A hush rippled through the crowd as the two men met. The suited man reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black envelope stamped with a golden emblem. The sight alone silenced the crowd. No one in their small village had ever seen anything like it. Arjun took the envelope, opened it slowly, and glanced at its contents. Then he looked up, his eyes sweeping over the villagers, lingering on those who had mocked him, laughed at his wife, humiliated them both. And then he spoke, his voice firm, resonant, carrying across the courtyard. "It's done," he said simply. "The deal is finalized!" A murmur rose from the crowd. "Deal? What deal?" The man in the suit stepped forward, his tone clipped, professional. "Congratulations, Mr. Arjun Rathore. Your family estate and business empire are officially back under your name." The words dropped like thunder, rolling through the crowd, shaking the ground beneath them. Mr. Arjun Rathore. The name detonated in Anya's mind, scattering her thoughts into fragments. She stared at him, her husband, the man she thought she knew, her breath caught in her throat. Arjun turned then, his gaze meeting hers. And for the first time since their wedding, she saw the full truth blazing in his eyes. The villages erupted like a volcano. Empire. Family estate. He's a Rathore. That Rathore family. The name carried weight, power, history, wealth that stretched beyond imagination. Generations of Rathores had ruled industries, their name etched in gold across towering buildings in the city. Everyone had heard of them, but no one, not even in their wildest dreams, imagined one would live in their dusty little village. Her stepmother pushed through the throng, her face pale, her arrogance shattered. What is this?" she stammered. What does this mean?" The suited man looked at her as though she were nothing more than an insect. "It means, madam," he said coldly, "that your son-in-law is one of the wealthiest men in the country." The world tilted. The same villagers who had sneered now stared in stunned silence, their mouths open, their pride crumbling into dust. And in the middle of it all stood Anya, her hands trembling, her breath shallow, her mind struggling to comprehend. The tidal wave crashing over her. The announcement, Arjun stepped forward, his voice calm, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You all thought I was nothing," he said, his tone low but powerful. "You mocked my wife. You humiliated her. You tried to break her spirit because you believed we had no worth." The crowd shifted uneasily, shame crawling up their necks. "But you were wrong," he continued, his gaze sweeping across every face. "I chose this life. I chose simplicity, because wealth means nothing if there is no heart behind it. And the only reason I stayed silent," he turned to Anya, his eyes softening, "was because I needed to know if I was loved for who I am, not what I own." A collective gasp rippled through the villagers. Some lowered their eyes, others exchanged looks, guilt written across their faces. But Arjun wasn't done. He turned to the suited man and spoke clearly, his words carrying like a drumbeat. "Prepare everything. The restoration ceremony will happen next week. And make sure invitations reach everyone, including those who stood here today." "Yes, sir," the man replied, bowing slightly before stepping aside. The stepfamily's fall, Anya's stepmother lunged forward, desperation etched across her face. "Arjun, beta, listen, we didn't mean—" He raised a hand, silencing her instantly. His eyes were like steel now, cold and unyielding. "You sold her like cattle," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You forced her into this marriage because you thought you were ridding yourself of a burden, and you dared to mock her after everything you did?" She shrank back, her lips trembling, her daughters clutching at her sari in terror. "You will never go near her again," Arjun said, his tone final, each word a hammer striking steel. "From this day forward, she is under my protection. And if I hear even a whisper of your name in her life—" His gaze darkened, and the threat hung heavy in the air. "You will regret it," The stepmother stumbled back, her face drained. Of color, her reign of cruelty reduced to ashes in a single moment. The crowd's silence. Not a word stirred in the crowd. The same people who once laughed now stared at the ground, their shame thick as smoke. Some muttered apologies under their breath. Others simply watched in stunned silence as Arjun turned back to his wife, the quiet village girl who had become a queen before their very eyes. The moment that changed everything, Arjun walked toward Anya slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still, the whispers fading, the stares dissolving, the chaos melting into nothing. When he stopped before her, he didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, as though memorizing every curve of her face, every shadow of pain etched into her soul. Then, softly, so only she could hear, he said, "I'm sorry." Two simple words, but they carried the weight of everything, every silent night, every humiliation she had endured, every moment she thought she was unloved, unwanted, forgotten. Her breath hitched. Tears burned her eyes, and before she could stop herself, they spilled down her cheeks. He reached up, brushing them away with a touch so gentle it broke something inside her, a dam she didn't know she'd built. And in that moment, surrounded by the very people who had mocked her, Anya felt something rise within her, something fierce and bright and unbreakable. For the first time in her life, she wasn't ashamed. She was proud, because she wasn't just the poor girl anymore. She was the wife of Arjun Rathore, the man who had turned humiliation into triumph, despair into destiny. And this was only the beginning. The next morning dawned unlike any other in the village. The whispers hadn't died. If anything, they had swelled into a roaring storm. From the well to the marketplace, there was only one name on every tongue: Arjun Rathore, the man they had called poor, the man they mocked. The man they thought beneath them, and the girl they pitied, the one they laughed at for marrying a man with nothing, was now the wife of a billionaire. The shame was like a shroud over the entire village. Those who once jeered now walked with heads bowed, afraid to meet Anya's eyes. But she barely noticed. Her mind was a whirlwind, trying to grasp the enormity of what had happened. Last night replayed in fragments, Arjun's steady voice cutting through the chaos. The villagers' stunned silence, her stepmother's face draining of color, the weight of his touch when he said those two words, "I'm sorry." And now, as she stood by the small window of their modest hut, staring at the rising sun, a strange sensation bloomed in her chest. Not fear, not confusion, but strength. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't walking alone. The transformation begins within a week. Everything changed. The house that once sagged under years of neglect now bustled with workers, masons, carpenters, decorators. Trucks arrived daily, carrying bricks, marble tiles, polished wood, and gleaming fixtures. The old mud walls gave way to grand arches, the thatched roof replaced with an elegant, sloping design. The villagers gathered at a distance, their eyes wide as they watched the transformation unfold. What had once been a symbol of poverty was becoming a palace before their eyes, and at the center of it all was Anya. She no longer walked with her head down. She no longer wore the faded saris that had once defined her. Silk draped her frame now, soft, flowing, shimmering like liquid moonlight. Her wrists sparkled with delicate bangles, and her hair, once tied in a simple braid, now fell in glossy waves. But it wasn't the clothes that changed her. It was the light in her eyes, the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had survived storms and emerged stronger. The day of the restoration ceremony arrived like a festival. Invitations had gone out to every villager, every person who had once mocked or belittled her. None dared refuse. The Rathore name carried weight, and now, so did hers. The courtyard was draped in gold and crimson. Crystal chandeliers glittered, above tables laden with delicacies the villagers had only heard of. A canopy of flowers arched over the entrance, their fragrance mingling with the hum of music played by a live orchestra. Cars, sleek, black, and gleaming, lined the dusty road, their presence so out of place it felt surreal. Men in crisp suits, women in elegant gowns, city elites with diamond-studded smiles, all had come to witness the return of the Rathors, and then came the moment that stilled the air. A hush fell as Anya stepped out, clad in an ivory lehenga embroidered. With gold, her dupatta trailing like a river of starlight, she walked with a grace that silenced even the most cynical tongues. Every eye followed her. Every whisper choked on its own shame. Behind her came Arjun, tall, commanding, his presence radiating authority. The two walked side by side, not as a broken couple shamed by poverty, but as equals, partners, a force that could not be undone. Duck. Reckoning after the prayers and blessings, Arjun took the stage. His gaze swept over the gathering, sharp and unflinching. "I invited you all here," he began, his voice deep, steady. "Not to flaunt wealth, but to teach a lesson." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This woman, my wife, was humiliated. By many of you. Laughed at, mocked, treated as less than nothing. All because you thought wealth determines worth. His tone hardened. It doesn't. Character does. Heads bowed. Some villagers shuffled their feet in shame. Others stared at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. Arjun's voice softened as he turned to Anya. "She stood by me when she thought I had nothing. That is strength. That is loyalty. That is love. And from today, if anyone dares disrespect her," his eyes swept the crowd like a blade, "they will answer to me." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. No one spoke. No one dared. At the far end of the crowd, Anya's stepmother stood trembling, her daughters clutching at her sari. The arrogance that once dripped from her every word was gone, replaced by naked fear. Arjun walked toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. She dropped to her knees before he even spoke, her voice breaking. "Forgive me, Beta," she pleaded, her hands folding in desperation. "I didn't know. You didn't care," Arjun cut in, his tone like steel. "You sold her happiness for your greed. You treated her like dirt because you thought she had no power." Tears streamed down her face, but Arjun's eyes remained cold. "You will never hurt her again," he said, his voice ringing with finality. "From this day forward, you have no place in her life." He turned without another word, leaving her crumpled in the dust as the crowd looked on in stunned silence. When the ceremony ended and the guests departed, Anya found herself standing on the balcony of her new home, the night breeze caressing her face. Below, the courtyard glittered with lights, music still drifting through the air like the last notes of a dream. Arjun stepped beside her, his presence warm, grounding. "You did this," he said softly. She turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a real smile, not the guarded one she had seen before. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost. Faith, trust, a reason to come back, not for the money, not for the power, but for a life worth living." Her throat tightened. For a moment, words deserted her. Then slowly, she slipped her hand into his, feeling the steady beat of his pulse against her palm. And as the lights of the mansion shimmered like stars below, Anya knew this was not the end. This was the beginning of a love that had been tested by fire, of a life that had risen from ashes to glory, and the world that once laughed at her. Now, it would never forget her name.